special Thursday edition of Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series. My name is Andrea Gillespie, and I am your host for the Housing for All episodes. I also serve as Senior Manager of Community Development at Charles Schwab Bank and also a board member of the Dallas Housing Coalition. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon on hopefully is one of the last things you'll be doing before you enjoy the holiday weekend. Um, on today's episode, we have a wonderful guest with us today, Camila Correa Bourdeau. She is the executive director of March to the Polls. My notes literally just closed on um, what I usually say in my script. So I'm opening it again right now. But as with each episode, Camilla and I will hopefully in a couple of minutes have an impactful conversation about the work that she does and how it intersects with housing and the issues that Dallas Housing Coalition works on. Um, Almost back. I don't want to forget anything. Gotta love technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
March to the Polls is a nonprofit dedicated to increasing electoral participation, particularly among underrepresented communities. With a background as a teacher and instructional coach, Camilla has committed herself to empowering first time voters, especially North Texas high school students. Through education and voter engagement, Camilla's leadership in March to the Polls has made a significant impact on the community, ensuring that new voters have the confidence and knowledge to cast their ballots. Thank you for joining me today, Camilla.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Likewise, likewise. I mentioned earlier that each week we try to have impactful one-on-one conversations with community leaders and Dallas Housing Coalition members, many of which are some of the strongest advocates for keeping Dallas affordable. So you are an esteemed group of people we have talked to since Housing for All premiered in 2023. And with that, I just want to go ahead and get started. One of the first questions I wanted to pose to you, and this is really on behalf of some of the viewers joining us today who might not be as familiar with March to the Polls as they would like to be, but can you share a bit more about the organization, including how March to the Polls got its start and the strategies that the organization deploys to increase voter participation?
Yeah, absolutely. March to the Polls started informally in 2015, and got to give a big shout out to one of our key founders, Richard Marcus, the late Richard Marcus, recently. And he was a part of a very strong community at his temple, and there were a lot of individuals that were like him, kind of, looking ahead to the presidential election and thinking about how to get involved, as it tends to happen. Like every presidential election just kind of garners more attention, and that'll be one of my key points today. Is that, of course, there's more elections than the presidential election. But that happens, and Richard, along a group of other leaders, Robert Elkin, I'll shout out, Eric Savi, I'll shout out, kind of started going out and registering people to vote, thinking that registration was a key way to get people involved. And it's very true that, today a very educated, or resourceful person might approach me and say, "Oh, where do I register to vote?" And it's not, that accessible, or maybe not as like not where you might expect it, or a little bit inconvenient. And so anyway, that was the key strategy, was just making registration more available. And the group was just like at grocery stores or at a local business in the neighborhood, and eventually joined with some other really great organizations in the community to go to a high school. It was kind of a one-off visit to a high school. I want to say it was Skyline High School. And in visiting Skyline, at the time, it was an exciting pep rally sort of setup, where one of the pieces of information that was shared with the students was, and here's a voter registration form, and this is how you register to vote. What Richard at the time and what the group of volunteers agreed on is that, there's so much more learning that needs to take place. Why don't we move this model into the classroom in a learning setting, a more intimate setting where it's a group of 30 students as opposed to, the entire senior class in one place, and really walk through not just how to complete this form, but discuss the voting process in general. So I'll fast forward because I know we have other questions to get to, and I want to, have a good discussion with you. But that eventually grew to what we have today, which is amazing partnerships with several North Texas school districts, 10 of whom have worked with us over the last few years, really since maybe 2017, 18, we began to formalize. And we offer in-class voter education. Texas is not known for having a very strong civics curriculum for Texas students. And we like to think that we're the ones that are bridging that gap here for our North Texas seniors in their classroom and registering those that are eligible at the end of our time with them. So that's primarily what we do, but there's more, but that's the big, that's a big part of March to the Polls and how we kind of got started.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing just a small snippet of what I'm sure is a very large body of work that March to the Polls does every year, and all years, year in and
Mhm.
year out. Specifically, how it's not just about voter registration, but really centering it on the education of just the voting process in general and what everything means. I think that is valuable education, no matter where you sit or who you are. So thank you for that. And I'm very curious on the topic of voting. How does Dallas voting participation fare or compare to other major cities, if you have a sense of that?
Yeah, well, one of the most pressing statistics that I keep in mind is that there's something called ease of voting index, and Texas unfortunately ranks at the bottom of that. And there's people, educators that we interface with often that might move to Texas. I just talked to one the other day, it came from Maryland, and they were like, oh my goodness, registering to vote has been, this big saga for me compared to what I'm used to from this other state that I came from. And that happens, like registration is not available online in Texas. I was mentioning just access to the forms, like where can I get one, and making sure that they're filled out exactly correctly so that you don't get, your form doesn't get thrown out because you missed something. And so that's one of the statistics that I share is just that in Texas, registration on its own, which isn't even voting yet, right? Just the registration process, Texas is dead last on that list, on that ease of voting index. Out of all the states, it's kind of, I mean, to me, that's always compelling and shocking. But then when it comes to voting, I don't have better news for you. I always focus on local elections. Dallas, our city, is also in at the bottom of many rankings when you are comparing to other American cities. And the stat that drives me to this day that we're making a dent on, but not, it's going to take time. It's going to take everybody that's listening here and, others in our community to make a difference. But yeah, 7% of our community, that 7% number gets me every time, vote in our local elections, like for mayor and city council
Mm,
and school board. And for me, I know, and again, we might get into this a little bit later, but that's how I kind of got started as a former educator. I wanted to know who was making decisions, about what I could teach in my classroom or types of activities that I could engage my students in. And when I learned about the big decisions that school board members face and the very low percentage of registered voters that participate in these elections, I think that was like, I couldn't let it go. And then I switched careers and have focused on voting ever since. So yeah, it doesn't look great when we look at other American cities and just focusing on ourselves, that only 7% of our neighbors are participating in these elections. And that's just the
right,
registered population. That's not even our
right,
entire population.
right, right. No, thank you for us. Thank you for providing that valuable context. And as we switch gears, I want to move our conversation to housing and how it might intersect with voter education. So that given that the Dallas Housing Coalition, of course, is focused on housing for all, I'm just curious, how have the communities that you has engaged with or educated, have have those underrepresented groups or communities at large shared other concerns they have for their communities, such as housing? And if so, what might you be hearing?
Yes, definitely. I mentioned that March the Polls got its start doing in-class voter education with students. That grew into now what is 36 civic engagement clubs for students. We call them student voter empowerment clubs. And in those clubs, it's open to students in 9th through 12th grade. And we were on 36 campuses last year. This year, we hope to be on 40 campuses. Um, Students have, because it's an extracurricular after school club that's year round, they have the ability to dig a little bit deeper into the issues that might matter to them. And we are a nonpartisan organization, so there's never any kind of endorsement of anything, but students naturally begin to wonder and ask about the things that impact their lives. And one of those things that has been discussed is they have to go to work. They might miss out on some activities. And why are they going to work? Many of them to help support the cost of rent for their families. And these are, 9th through 12th graders that I know that's not every student's experience, but for those who, that is top of mind and that it's not about let me get some cash so I can buy the new shoes that I want, and it's more about making sure that their family has what they need. It's definitely challenging, and I think deeply motivating to participate in the electoral process when they know that there's some connection there, that in being civically engaged, they can do something about the hardships that they might see, whether it relates to housing or some other issue that, is relevant to them.
That's a wonderful example that you shared about a student drilling down, why is it that I have to work and miss this particular school activity or can't join this athletic team? And then the light bulb goes off and they realize it's because of making sure the family can make rent every month. And that really kind of leads me to my next question. And it feels like this happens, but you're the expert, so I want to make sure that my line of thinking is in line with reality. But I can imagine that if you're able to get someone registered to vote, and then they follow through on that by actually voting, not just in the big elections, but every election, that they start to kind of have a wider or deeper public awareness of community issues, whether that be, gun violence or transportation or um, types of jobs they can apply to, or, in our case, affordability. Is that the case? It sounds like it might be, but I'd love to hear an example or two of that light bulb going off and they start thinking about these wider issues once they get civically engaged.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'll give an example. We had one club at Conrad High School, shout out to Conrad, which, by the way, is one of the most diverse like student populations. You have a big refugee population that lives in the area, Vickery Meadow. Um, Amazing school. Their students wanted to have a forum where they invited the elected officials of their area. And I think for most of them, they were interested in hearing from the school board trustee because that's their most proximate experience. It's like, I'm a student, I'm at school, and I can talk about the things that I want for my school community with my school board trustee because I've learned that they're one of the decision makers. But what happened at that forum is that you had also your city council representative and a state representative, and like a chief of staff for another elected official for that area. And in being exposed to that panel, they learned, oh, that's the person that's responsible for this other issue that I care about that I didn't even really have on my radar. And now I know that they also have meetings that I could attend where I can voice my opinion. Or even, I always share this example, and this is an oldie but a goodie that I often share. There was this young woman who was a high school student that reached out to a school board trustee, and I always share this, that school board trustee, I think, mentioned that high school student's name over a period of like 3 months at every meeting because they don't often hear from students. And so when a student is reaching out to their elected official, and in this case I mentioned, now they're aware that city council is also an important representative that can impact their quality of life, they have a direct line, and often the representatives will say, like, here's my information, here's how you can get a hold of me. Not a lot of people take them up on that, but those that do, they realize, oh, these people are accessible and they do care to listen to me. It's just kind of learning to navigate the path. So I hope that example, is a good one to your question, but your belief is absolutely aligned with reality. Everybody starts somewhere and then eventually that grows into something else.
I love all of those examples, and yes, absolutely. I'm glad to hear that we're all on the same page, and I'm sure some of our viewers were wondering about that transformation as well. So thank you for that. Kind of going into the work again that you do in North Texas school districts, with students in their schools, probably, you also interface with other educational personnel, whether that's administrators or teachers. What role do you see students and educational institutions playing uh, to address issues outside of the classroom, like housing? Do those things come up in the course of you educating them about voting and the process and how it works?
Yes. I mean, schools are such powerful institutions in our communities because it's where like all issues kind of intersect and come to light in our experience or in learning about the experiences of our students, and everybody's coming from different backgrounds, and there are definitely schools that will take it upon themselves to share additional resources with the families. I haven't heard specifically, like, and this is just in my perspective, about something tied to housing, but inevitably what happens again is, like our organization is going to be at the open house night for an elementary school or at the, I don't know, dinner at a different high school. The families are there. And as soon as they, it begins with, yeah, we're here to talk to you about like voting and making sure that you're prepared. It's almost like it just comes, they immediately want to discuss, oh, well, what do I do about this other issue? Because they trust in schools and they trust in the school community. And so any resources that a school can share, I mean, I feel like, again, they're very powerful institutions that can be incredibly helpful to the families that they serve. And at least from my vantage point, I can't tell you exactly what other resources are shared, but I know that for us, there's often other questions where we then have to say, okay, let's refer you to this other group, or we know about this other organization that might have information for you. And by the way, I've also just learned, I mean, there's a lot of incredible organizations that give resources to schools. And because schools have so many systems in place, they're able to more easily and broadly share, information with their constituents. And anyway, I hope that answers the question, but yes, I think in a nutshell, schools are powerful institutions that can absolutely be used for good outside of just the education that students experience.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I also serve as a junior achievement volunteer. So I go into schools and teach about financial literacy. And the older grades, they start to learn about things like starting their own businesses and capital and things of that nature. And coming from a banking institution, it opens up a lot of conversations about, how banks supports, entrepreneurs, what that support looks like. So you're absolutely right. You can open the door to one topic and then make all these connections
Mhm.
to, other things that they need to know about their community. So thank you for that. Um, Dallas Housing Coalition is blessed to have a very wide and deep bench of committed members, a lot of which I'm sure are listening in right now. And they probably have this question: how can the Dallas Housing Coalition collaborate with an organization like March to the Polls, given what we know about you and what you know about us?
Yeah, right. I mean, right, exactly. Especially with what I know about us, because I would love to know, how we could collaborate. But with us, we're always looking for community leaders like yourself, like the members that you're alluding to that are part of the coalition, to go into their local high school, the school that they graduated from. I graduated from Richardson High School. You know, I always want to sign up to be the person that goes to Richardson to
Mhm.
talk to the seniors about voting. Or there might be a high school down the street. Conrad is actually, again, with Conrad down the street from me. If they have an event, I can sign up and volunteer to go in the morning and then, you know, move on to whatever other business I have to do after that. And that is how I got started with March the Polls was I was missing my connection with students because I had left the classroom and wanted to stay involved in some way. And that's where, again, the light bulb really went off. I mean, students were asking questions and it was really meaningful. And I always say I learned a lot. You know, we're not just there to kind of preach or talk to the students. It's an exchange. It's mutually beneficial. So as far as members of the coalition, anybody that wants to join us in the high schools, with either helping them complete their forms accurately, talking to them about voting, which we have materials, we train individuals to do that, or going out to the community events. You know, I mentioned earlier, there's an elementary school that wants us to go have a table and share resources for their community. While we're not going to do like the voter education the way we might do in a high school. That's a community event where we want to make sure that we do leave the families with a feeling of readiness for voting. And I don't know if I'll get another chance to say this, so I'll share it now, which is that,
Please.
you know, I, there is a misconception from people, and maybe it's starting to shift, but in the past, and I think also still, there's a misconception that young people don't care about voting. And that has shifted. I mean, maybe in 2017, when I asked students, raise your hand if you think your vote matters, not many of them would. And I couldn't tell you why, but they wouldn't. Today, when we ask that question, you always have like 80% of the students raising their hand to say, yeah, I believe my vote matters. But when we ask them, do you have sufficient knowledge to go out and vote? Like if there was an election coming up, would you be prepared to go vote? And hardly any of them raise their hands, which for us again highlights just the education gap, you know? And I always compare it to college. I feel like students grow up hearing go to college, you know, and there's so many resources. I mean, there's offices at each high school that equip students with what they need in order to apply for FAFSA or look at the college applications, write their essays. With voting, we're on phase one, which is they hear vote, vote, you should vote. But then when you get to the how of it, that's where we need more of an investment of resources. And so we would love for the coalition members to join us in the classrooms to help continue to educate and inspire students. And I'd be curious to learn how we can support the coalition.
I think that's a great place to start. And to your earlier point, if our coalition members are in the classroom talking about how to register to vote, and out of that comes conversations about housing, or what do I do after high school, or how do I access college as housing as a young adult? You know, sounds like the coalition can help them with that too.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
As we begin to round out our conversation, one last question for you. What types of actions would you encourage our viewers today to take, both in support of, you know, voter registration and engagement, and also on the issue of housing for all in their communities?
I have three. So it starts with, and you have kind of 3 months, not really, a little bit less, but for the month of September, it's to register to vote. It's all about registration. Check your status. Some people, and this happens, and please, I don't want this to be you, whoever's listening, like check to make sure that you are in fact registered, that it's updated. Sometimes when you don't vote for a couple of years, you might be removed from the voter roll. You have to show up as a registered voter in order to vote. I would hate for anybody to get turned away. So that it's register, check your registration status in the month of September. Then in October, it's make a plan to vote. And what do I mean by that? It might sound a little bit silly, but my team, I mean, we're out there talking to people about voting all the time. Last election, which happened this past spring, we all voted on election day. We shouldn't have done that. We should have voted during the early voting period, but we had not made a plan to vote. And so it was us scrambling at the last minute to make sure that we had time on that day. You have over 10 days to vote. So make a plan, If you want to get an A on a test, you make a plan to study, right? You want to lose weight, you make a plan to go to the gym or eat healthy. It's the same thing with voting. Don't let it fall to the end of your priority list. Make a plan. When am I going to go? What time am I going to go? What do I need? That's your homework for October. And then at the end of October, I mentioned early voting period, about 10 days, and also definitely in November by election day, vote. Bring a friend. Don't assume that everybody knows and they've got it. Bring your people. I always send an email to my neighbors during election time to make sure that they're going out to vote. So those are your assignments, and I hope that is sufficient.
Yes, absolutely. Very practical ways to ensure that everyone shows up to vote.
I didn't get that.
Thank.
Could you try
Sorry
again?
about that.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. I had my difficulties at the top of the call. No
Yeah.
worries.
I'm here to wrap it up with the difficulties. Yeah.
I know, right? Well, thank you so much, Camilla, for joining us this afternoon on a special edition of our Thursday Housing for All webinar, and just sharing your unique perspectives on the intersection between voter registration and community issues like housing. Before we sign off today, I want to remind everyone with us to follow Dallas Housing Coalition on all its socials for updates how to get involved and stay connected with the Housing for All webinar series. And while you're at it, make sure you visit the coalition's website at dallashousingcoalition.com to learn more about the work of the coalition and its member organizations. You can also join the coalition at the website if you are not already a member. Finally, if you're interested in showing your support for the City of Dallas's land use plan called Forward Dallas, please check out the Dallas Housing Coalition social media posts for a few suggestions on how to do so. Thank you again for joining us for another edition of our Housing for All webinar series, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. I hope everyone with us today is having or is about to have a good holiday weekend, and we will see you all very soon. Take care.